She snuck into the mountain man's bed for warmth. What he saw left him stunned. Marcus Thornwood had been living alone in his wooden cabin for 5 years now. The cabin sat high up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, so far from any town that most people didn't even know it existed. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and the closest small town was almost 30 miles down, winding dangerous mountain roads. This was exactly how Marcus wanted it. He was a big man with a thick beard that had started showing streaks of gray, even though he was only 38 years old. His hands were rough and calloused from chopping wood and building things. Every morning he would wake up before sunrise, make strong black coffee, and sit on his porch watching the sun come up over the mountain peaks. The silence was his friend now. It hadn't always been that way. Before moving to the mountains, Marcus had been one of the best search and rescue specialists in the state. He led a team of brave men and women who went out in terrible weather to find lost hikers, injured climbers, and anyone else who got into trouble in the wilderness. He loved that work. He loved knowing that his skills and courage could save lives. But then, 5 years ago, everything changed in one horrible moment. There had been an avalanche. Marcus and his team were searching for a group of college students who had gone skiing in a restricted area. The weather had been bad for days and the snow was unstable. Marcus knew it was dangerous, but those students needed help. They went out anyway. The mountain came down on them like a white wave of destruction. Marcus survived because he happened to be 50 feet behind the others, checking his equipment. His entire team was buried in seconds. By the time more rescuers arrived, it was too late. All 6 members of his team were gone. Marcus blamed himself completely. He was the team leader. He had made the decision to go out in those conditions. For months after the tragedy, he couldn't sleep without seeing their faces. He quit his job, left his apartment in Denver, and used all his savings to buy this remote cabin. He told himself he just needed time alone to heal, but the truth was he was running away from people, from responsibility, from the possibility of losing anyone else he cared about. Now his life followed a simple routine. He chopped wood for the fire, he hunted deer and elk for food. He read books by lantern light because he had no electricity except for a small solar panel that powered one light bulb. Once a month he would make the long drive down to the town to buy supplies like flour, coffee, and kerosene. The people in town knew him as the quiet mountain man who kept to himself. He never told anyone about his past. February was always the hardest month in the mountains. The cold was bitter and sharp, the kind that made your bones ache. The snow was often 10 feet deep in places. Most people with any sense stayed far away from the high mountains in February. But Marcus didn't mind. He had a good sturdy cabin with thick walls and a stone fireplace that kept him warm. He had enough food stored up to last through any storm. He was prepared for anything, or so he thought. On this particular February night, Marcus noticed the sky changing in a way that made him uneasy. He had lived in the mountains long enough to read the signs. The clouds were moving in fast, low and dark and heavy with snow. The wind was picking up, making howling sound through the pine trees. The temperature was dropping quickly. This wasn't going to be an ordinary snowstorm. This was going to be a blizzard, the dangerous kind that could last for days and bury everything under mountains of white. Marcus moved quickly to prepare. He brought extra firewood inside and stacked it near the fireplace. He checked his food supplies and filled several large containers with water from the pump outside, knowing the pump might freeze. He covered his small window with an extra piece of wood to keep the wind from breaking the glass. He made sure his kerosene lanterns were filled and ready. Everything was secure. By the time darkness fell, the storm had arrived with full force. The wind screamed around the cabin, shaking the walls. Snow fell so thick and fast that Marcus couldn't see more than a few feet beyond his porch. He had seen many storms in his 5 years here, but this one felt different, more violent and angry. He was grateful to be safe inside with a warm fire burning. Marcus ate a simple dinner of venison stew and bread, then sat in his wooden chair by the fire, reading an old Western novel. Around 9 o'clock, he added more logs to the fire, making sure it would burn through most of the night. Then he went to his small bedroom, climbed under his heavy quilts, and fell asleep listening to the storm rage outside. What Marcus didn't know was that miles below his cabin, someone else was caught in that same terrible storm, fighting desperately to survive. Elena Reyes had made a mistake, and she knew it. At 28 years old, she was a talented wildlife photographer who had sold her pictures to magazines and nature publications. She was good at her job because she was patient and willing to go places other photographers wouldn't go. She would hike for hours into the wilderness, camp in uncomfortable places, and wait in the cold for hours just to get the perfect shot of a rare animal. For the past week, she had been tracking a lynx, a beautiful wildcat with pointed ears and thick fur. Lynx were rare in Colorado, and Elena had received a tip that one had been spotted in this area. She had driven up the mountain roads in her old Jeep, camping in different spots, following tracks in the snow, hoping for just one good photograph. That afternoon, she had finally spotted it. The lynx was magnificent, moving silently through the snow between the trees. Alina's heart had raced with excitement as she took picture after picture, capturing the animal in beautiful winter light. She had been so focused on the lynx that she hadn't noticed the sky changing, hadn't paid attention to the wind picking up. She was too far from her camping spot, too deep in the wilderness. By the time Alina realized the storm was coming, it was almost too late. She tried to hurry back to her Jeep, but the snow started falling so fast she could barely see where she was going. The wind pushed against her, making each step difficult. Her hands were getting numb, even inside her gloves. The temperature was dropping fast. When she finally reached her Jeep, Alina was relieved. She would be safe inside until the storm passed. She had a sleeping bag, some food, and a full tank of gas to run the heater. Everything would be fine. She started the engine and began driving carefully down the narrow mountain road, hoping to get to a lower elevation before the worst of the storm hit. That's when disaster struck. The road was already covered in ice under the new snow. Alina's Jeep started sliding. She tried to steer, tried to brake carefully, but nothing worked. The vehicle slid sideways, then began tumbling down an embankment. Alina screamed as the world spun around her. Jeep crashed into rocks and trees, finally coming to rest on its side in a deep ravine. For several moments, Alina just sat there, stunned and shaking. She checked herself carefully. Nothing seemed broken, though her shoulder hurt badly and she had cuts on her face from broken glass. But she was alive. She tried to open the door, but it was jammed. She managed to kick out the remaining glass from the broken window and crawl out into the snow. The situation was bad. Her Jeep was destroyed and stuck in a ravine where no one would see it. Her cell phone had no signal and the battery was almost dead anyway. Night was falling and the storm was getting worse by the minute. Alina had some survival training, but she knew she was in serious danger. She couldn't stay with the Jeep because she would freeze to death. She needed to find shelter, and fast. Then she remembered something. Earlier that day, while photographing the lynx, she had looked up at the higher elevations and seen smoke coming from a chimney somewhere up the mountain. Someone lived up there. It was her only chance. Alina pulled on every piece of warm clothing she had, wrapped her scarf around her face, and started climbing out of the ravine. Every step was a battle against the wind and snow. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Her hands were so cold they barely worked. But she kept moving, knowing that if she stopped, she would die. She had no idea how long she walked. It might have been 2 hours or 4 hours. Time lost all meaning. The world was just cold and white and endless. Several times she fell in the deep snow and almost couldn't get back up. But each time, she forced herself to stand and keep going. She had to find that cabin. She had to survive. Finally, through the blowing snow, Alina saw a dark shape. A building. The cabin. She had found it. With the last of her strength, she stumbled toward it. She tried to knock on the door, but her frozen hands couldn't make any sound. She tried to call out, but her voice was gone. Then she tried the door handle, and to her enormous relief, it opened. The cabin was unlocked. Alina fell inside, too exhausted to even close the door behind her. The air inside was warmer, though the fire had burned down to just glowing embers. She could see a small living area with simple furniture and an open door leading to what looked like a bedroom. Alina's survival instinct took over. She needed warmth immediately. She crawled toward the bedroom, her body shaking violently from hypothermia. In the darkness, she could make out a large bed with someone sleeping in it. She didn't think about how the person might react. She didn't think about anything except getting warm. She crawled onto the bed and pulled the blankets over herself, pressing close to the source of heat. As consciousness began to slip away, Alina's last thought was that she had made it. She was safe. She didn't know who this person was or how they would react when they woke up, but right now none of that mattered. She was warm, and she was alive. Marcus was having a strange dream. In the dream, he was back with his rescue team, searching through snow for someone who needed help. He could hear breathing, labored and difficult, echoing through the white landscape. The sound pulled at him, urgent and real. Then suddenly, he wasn't dreaming anymore. He was waking up, and that breathing sound was still there. His eyes opened slowly in the pre-dawn darkness. Something was different. Wrong. There was a weight on his bed that shouldn't be there. Marcus had lived alone for 5 years, and he knew exactly how his bed should feel. This wasn't right. His body tensed immediately, all his senses alert. Someone else was in his bed. His first thought was that maybe an animal had somehow gotten inside, though he knew that didn't make sense. Bears were hibernating, and no other animal would crawl into bed with a human. His hand slowly reached for the kerosene lantern on the small table beside his bed. His fingers found the matches, and with practiced movements in the dark, he struck one and lit the lantern. The warm yellow light filled the small bedroom, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. There was a person in his bed, a woman, curled up under his blankets, shivering violently even in her sleep. Her dark hair was wet and tangled, with ice crystals still melting in it. Her face was pale, almost blue in color, with cuts on her cheek and forehead. Her lips had a frightening purple tint to them. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. Who was this woman? How did she get here? Was she dangerous? But his rescue training kicked in faster than his questions. He had seen hypothermia many times before, and this woman had all the signs. Severe hypothermia was life-threatening. Whatever else was happening, this person needed medical help immediately. He started to pull the blanket back to assess her condition better, and that's when he saw something that made his heart nearly stop. The woman's arms were wrapped tightly around something, holding it protectively against her chest. At first, in the lantern light, Marcus couldn't tell what it was. A bag? A bundle of clothing? Then it moved slightly, and Marcus realized with shock what he was looking at. It was a baby. A tiny infant, wrapped in a woman's jacket, nestled against the stranger's body. The baby was so small, couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its little face was visible, eyes closed, lips tinged with the same dangerous blue color as the woman's. For a moment, Marcus just stared, unable to process what he was seeing. A woman and a baby, both nearly frozen to death, had somehow ended up in his bed in the middle of a blizzard. His mind struggled to make sense of it. Was this the woman's child? How had they gotten up here? Where had they come from? The nearest town was 30 miles away, and no one in their right mind would bring an infant up this mountain in winter, especially with a storm coming. But questions would have to wait. Both the woman and the baby were in critical condition. Marcus had been trained for emergency situations, and that training took over now, pushing aside his confusion and shock. He knew exactly what needed to be done, and he needed to move fast. He jumped out of bed and rushed to the fireplace in the main room. The embers were still glowing, and he quickly added kindling in small pieces of wood, blowing on them to encourage the flames. Within minutes, he had a strong fire burning. The cabin was cold, and he needed to get the temperature up, but not too quickly. Warming someone with severe hypothermia too fast could actually kill them. Next, he filled his largest pot with water and set it near the fire to warm. Not boiling hot, just warm. He grabbed several empty glass bottles and set them aside. He would fill them with warm water to use as gentle heat sources. He pulled out every blanket he owned from the wooden chest in the corner. He lit 2 more lanterns to give himself better light to work with. Then Marcus went back to the bedroom. He needed to move the woman and baby closer to the fire, but he had to be careful. The woman was unconscious, and he didn't want to jostle the baby too much. As gently as he could, he slid his arms under the woman's body and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, and he realized she probably hadn't eaten properly in days. The baby remained cradled against her chest, and Marcus could see now that the woman had opened her own jacket and shirt, using her own body heat to keep the infant warm. She had been protecting this child with her own life. He carried them both to the main room and laid them on his couch, which he had pulled close to the fire. He wrapped them in layers of blankets, making sure the baby's face was uncovered so it could breathe. Then he knelt beside them and did a quick medical assessment with the skills he still remembered from his rescue days. The woman's pulse was there, but it was slow and weak. Her skin was dangerously cold to the touch. Her breathing was shallow. She had the typical signs of stage 3 hypothermia, which meant her core body temperature had probably dropped below 90 degrees. This was a medical emergency. In a normal situation, he would call for a helicopter evacuation immediately, but there was no normal about this situation. His phone was broken, there was a massive blizzard outside, and no helicopter could fly in this weather anyway. He was on his own. The baby worried him even more. Infants could die from hypothermia much faster than adults. He carefully unwrapped the child from the jacket, checking for injuries and assessing its condition. It was a little girl, he could see now, wearing a simple onesie that was damp from melted snow. Her tiny body was cold, her lips blue, but she was breathing. As he examined her, the baby's face scrunched up, and she let out a weak cry. It was a good sign. A very good sign. The baby had enough strength to cry, which meant she wasn't as far gone as he had feared. Marcus worked quickly and methodically. He gently removed the woman's wet outer clothing, leaving her undergarments on for modesty, and wrapped her in dry blankets. He did the same for the baby, finding an old soft flannel shirt of his own that he wrapped around the infant's tiny body. The shirt was enormous on her, but it was dry and warm. He checked the water in the pot. It was warm now, not hot. He filled 3 glass bottles with the warm water, sealed them tightly, and wrapped them in towels. He placed one near the woman's chest, one near her legs, and held the third one close to the baby, being very careful not to make it too hot against her delicate skin. Then he sat back and monitored them both closely, checking their pulses every few minutes, watching the color gradually return to their skin. It was a slow process. With hypothermia, you couldn't rush it. The body needed to warm up gradually, from the inside out. Too much heat too fast could cause the cold blood from the extremities to rush to the heart and cause cardiac arrest. As he waited and watched, Marcus's mind kept returning to the same questions. Who were these people? The woman looked young, maybe in her late 20s. She was wearing hiking clothes, the kind that serious outdoor enthusiasts wore. She had good boots, though they were soaked through. There was a camera bag that had fallen off her shoulder. Expensive looking. A photographer, maybe? But what about the baby? Marcus looked at the tiny infant, now sleeping peacefully wrapped in his flannel shirt. The woman had risked everything to keep this child warm. She had given up her own body heat, which was why she was in worse condition than the baby. That kind of sacrifice meant something. But was it her child? Something about the situation didn't add up. Who would bring a newborn infant into the mountains in February? Around mid-morning, the baby woke up and started crying in earnest. This was actually good news to Marcus. The baby had enough energy to be hungry and upset, which meant her body temperature was improving. But now he had a new problem. He had no idea how to feed an infant. Marcus had never been around babies much. He was an only child, and he had never married or had children of his own. He stood there for a moment, feeling helpless, as the tiny person wailed. Then his practical side took over. Babies drank milk. He didn't have fresh milk, but he had canned evaporated milk in his supplies. He had read somewhere that you could dilute it with water for feeding babies in emergencies. He heated water carefully, mixed it with the canned milk until it was lukewarm, and poured it into a clean cup. He didn't have a baby bottle, so he would have to improvise. He found a clean cloth, dipped the corner in the milk mixture, and gently placed it against the baby's lips. At first, she didn't know what to do, but then instinct kicked in and she began sucking on the cloth. It was slow and messy, but it worked. The baby drank about half the cup this way, and then fell back asleep, apparently satisfied. Marcus changed the warm water bottles, keeping a constant gentle heat around both his patients. He added more wood to the fire. He checked pulses and breathing. Hours passed this way. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, wind howling around the cabin, snow piling up against the walls. It was late afternoon when the woman finally stirred. Her eyes moved beneath her eyelids. Her fingers twitched. Marcus leaned forward, watching carefully. After 5 more minutes, her eyes slowly opened. They were dark brown, confused, and unfocused at first. She blinked several times, trying to understand where she was. Then suddenly her eyes went wide with panic. She tried to sit up quickly, which was a bad idea. Her body was still weak, and she immediately fell back against the couch, dizzy and disoriented, but her hands were frantically searching, patting the blankets around her, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. "The baby?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "Where's the baby? Sophie? Where's Sophie?" Marcus held up his hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "She's safe," he said quietly. "The baby is right here. She's okay." He carefully picked up the sleeping infant from the nest of blankets he had made for her nearby and brought her over so the woman could see. The moment the woman's eyes fell on the baby, relief flooded her face. Tears started streaming down her cheeks and her whole body seemed to relax. "She's alive," the woman whispered. "She's really alive," I thought. I was so scared that... Her voice broke and she started crying harder, her body shaking with emotion and exhaustion. Marcus didn't know what to do with a crying woman. He had avoided emotional situations for 5 years, but something about her tears, about the obvious love and relief in her face as she looked at the baby, touched something in him that he thought had died. "You both made it," Marcus said simply. "You're both going to be okay. But you need to rest. You had severe hypothermia. Your body needs time to recover." The woman nodded, but she kept her eyes fixed on the baby. Can I hold her?" she asked. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure if she was strong enough yet, but he could see the desperate need in her eyes. Carefully, he placed the sleeping infant in the woman's arms. She immediately pulled the baby close, fresh tears rolling down her face as she held the child against her heart. "Thank you," she whispered to Marcus. "Thank you for saving us." I didn't know. I didn't know if we would make it. The storm was so bad, and I was so cold, and she's so little, and I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to keep her warm enough, and the words tumbled out in a rush, and Marcus could hear the trauma and fear in her voice. He pulled up a wooden chair and sat down nearby. "My name is Marcus," he said. "This is my cabin. You're safe here. But I need to know what happened. Who are you? And whose baby is this?" The woman took a shaky breath, looking down at the sleeping infant in her arms. When she looked back up at Marcus, her eyes held a story that he knew was going to be complicated. "My name is Elena," she said slowly. "Elena Reyes. And this baby, this is Sophie. And I need to tell you something that you're probably not going to believe." Elena took a sip of the warm broth that Marcus had prepared for her. Her hands were still shaking slightly as she held the cup, but the feeling was returning to her fingers. The baby, Sophie, was sleeping peacefully in her arms, wrapped snugly in Marcus's oversized flannel shirt. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and outside the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin there was warmth and safety. Marcus sat across from her, waiting patiently. His blue eyes were steady and calm, not judging, just listening. Elena knew her story was going to sound strange, maybe even unbelievable, but she had to tell him the truth. This man had saved both their lives. He deserved to know everything. "Sophie isn't my baby," Elena began, and she saw Marcus's eyebrows raise slightly. "I mean, I didn't give birth to her. I found her 2 days ago." She paused, gathering her thoughts, trying to figure out where to start. Marcus said nothing, just nodded for her to continue. "I'm a wildlife photographer," Elena explained. "I've been working in this area for about a week, trying to get photos of a lynx that was spotted up here. I know it sounds crazy to be out here alone in winter, but this is what I do. I've been doing it for 5 years. I'm usually very careful about weather forecasts and safety. I camp in my Jeep, I have good equipment, I know what I'm doing." She looked down at Sophie, her heart squeezing with emotion as she remembered that terrible moment of discovery. 2 days ago, I was photographing near a stream about 10 miles from here. I had set up my camera on a tripod, waiting for the lynx to come down to drink. It was late afternoon and the light was perfect. I was completely focused on my work. Then I heard something. At first I thought it might be an animal, but then I realized it was crying. A baby crying. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on her words. I followed the sound and found an old campsite, the kind that looks like it had been abandoned quickly. There was a tent, partially collapsed and some trash scattered around, and inside the tent... Elena's voice caught, and she had to take a moment before continuing. Inside the tent was this tiny baby, lying in a sleeping bag, crying her heart out. She was alone. Completely alone. "There was no one else around?" Marcus asked quietly. "No one. I searched the entire area, calling out, looking for whoever had left her, but there was nobody. Just this baby, maybe 3 or 4 weeks old, left in a tent in the wilderness." Elena's voice trembled with the memory of that shock and horror. She shifted Sophie slightly in her arms, looking down at the infant's peaceful face. There was a note pinned to the sleeping bag. It was written on a piece of torn paper in messy handwriting. It said, "Her name is Sophie. I can't do this. Please save her." That was all. No explanation, no last name, nothing else. Marcus ran his hand through his beard, processing this information. Someone abandoned their baby in the mountains? "Yes," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't believe it either. I kept thinking maybe the mother had gone to get help, or maybe she was hurt somewhere nearby. I spent over an hour searching and calling out, but I never found anyone. The campsite looked like it had been abandoned for at least several hours, maybe longer. The baby was cold, hungry, and had been crying for who knows how long. She took another sip of the broth, feeling its warmth spread through her body. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to get her to safety as quickly as possible, to get her to authorities who could help. But I was so far from any town. My Jeep was parked about 5 miles away from where I found her. I wrapped her in my jacket, held her close to keep her warm, and started hiking back. Marcus stood up and added another log to the fire, then sat back down. That must have been difficult carrying an infant that far. It was, Elena admitted. But I was so worried about her that I barely noticed how tired I was. I just kept walking, talking to her the whole time, telling her she was going to be okay. When I finally reached my Jeep, it was getting dark. I had some formula powder in my emergency supplies, believe it or not. I keep all kinds of things in my Jeep for emergencies. I mixed it with bottled water and fed her using a clean cloth, kind of like what you did earlier. She smiled slightly at Marcus. You did a good job with that, by the way. I saw the cup and cloth. You probably saved her life with that feeding. Marcus shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what seemed logical. Elena continued her story. I spent that night in my Jeep with Sophie. I kept the engine running for heat, fed her every few hours, changed her diaper using some cloth I tore from an old shirt. She cried a lot that first night, and I didn't sleep at all. I just held her and tried to keep her comfortable. I was planning to drive down the mountain at first light and take her straight to the police station in town. Her expression darkened as she remembered what happened next. But when I woke up the next morning, I could see the weather changing. The sky looked dangerous, and the wind was picking up. I'm not an expert, but I've spent enough time in the mountains to know storm signs. I knew I should leave immediately, but I made a mistake. I thought I had a little more time. I wanted to pack up my equipment properly, make sure Sophie had a fresh diaper, get some food in me so I could drive safely. She shook her head at her own foolishness. By the time I started driving, the snow was already falling. It came so much faster than I expected. The road was getting slippery, visibility was dropping. I was being careful driving slowly, but it wasn't enough. There's a curve in the road about 3 miles down from here, and that's where I lost control. Marcus could see the fear in her eyes as she relived the moment. The Jeep just started sliding. I couldn't stop it. We went off the road and rolled down into a ravine. I don't even remember how many times we flipped. I just remember holding Sophie as tight as I could, trying to protect her with my body. When we finally stopped, the Jeep was on its side. All the windows were broken. My camera equipment was destroyed. My phone was dead. Everything was ruined. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But Sophie was okay. Somehow, she was okay. She was crying and scared, but she wasn't hurt. I had a few cuts and bruises, and my shoulder hurt badly, but nothing was broken. We were alive. But we were also trapped in a ravine in a blizzard with no way to call for help. Marcus listened intently, imagining the terror she must have felt in that moment. I knew we couldn't stay with the Jeep, Elena continued. The engine was dead, and even if it had been working, the exhaust pipe was blocked with snow. We would freeze to death if we stayed there. I remembered seeing smoke from a chimney earlier when I was photographing, somewhere higher up the mountain. It was our only chance. So I wrapped Sophie in everything warm I could find, put her inside my jacket against my chest, and started climbing. Her voice grew quieter as she described the ordeal. I've never been so cold in my entire life. The wind was like knives cutting through my clothes. The snow was so deep I could barely walk. I fell so many times I lost count. My legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. I couldn't feel my hands or feet anymore. But I kept going because of Sophie. Every time I wanted to just lie down in the snow and rest, I would feel her little body against mine, and I would force myself to take another step. Tears were flowing freely down Elena's face now. I don't even know how long I walked. It felt like forever. Time stopped meaning anything. The world was just white and cold and endless. I started thinking maybe I had imagined seeing that smoke. Maybe there was no cabin. Maybe I was walking in circles. But then, finally, I saw a dark shape through the snow. Your cabin. She looked at Marcus with gratitude shining in her eyes. I tried to knock, but my hands wouldn't work anymore. I tried to call out, but I had no voice left. Then I tried the door, and it opened. I couldn't believe it was unlocked. It felt like a miracle. I crawled inside, and all I could think about was getting warm. I saw the bedroom, and I knew there was someone sleeping there, but I was beyond caring about manners or explanations. I just needed warmth, and Sophie needed warmth. So I crawled into the bed, and that's the last thing I remember, until I woke up this afternoon. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing everything she had told him. It was an incredible story, almost unbelievable. Yet he could see the truth of it in her eyes, in the exhaustion that still marked her face, in the protective way she held the baby. You saved her life, Marcus finally said. Whoever left that baby in the woods, for whatever reason, they left her to die. But you found her, and you kept her alive through incredible circumstances. You nearly died yourself keeping her warm. Elena looked down at Sophie, her expression soft. I couldn't leave her. When I found her in that tent, something just clicked inside me. She was so tiny, so helpless, so innocent. What kind of person would I be if I had just walked away? Even if it meant risking my own life, I had to try to save her. Not everyone would have made that choice, Marcus said quietly. A lot of people would have been too afraid, or would have convinced themselves that someone else would find her, or that it wasn't their responsibility. Elena shrugged slightly. Maybe, but I couldn't do that. The moment I picked her up, she became my responsibility. I know that sounds strange since she's not actually my child, but that's how it felt. Marcus stood up and walked to the small window, pulling back the wooden shutter slightly to look outside. The storm was still raging, snow piling up against the cabin walls. "We're going to be stuck here for a while," he said. "This storm is supposed to last at least 2 or 3 more days, according to the last forecast I heard. And even when it stops, the roads will be impassable for probably another day after that." He turned back to face Elena. "My satellite phone broke last month, and I haven't replaced it yet. There's no cell service up here. We have no way to contact anyone until we can physically get down the mountain." Elena's eyes widened. "So we can't call the police? We can't tell anyone about Sophie?" "Not yet," Marcus confirmed. "We're completely cut off up here. It's just you, me, and Sophie until this storm passes and we can make it down the mountain safely." Elena looked down at the baby in her arms, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Relief that they were safe, worry about what would happen next, and something else, something that surprised her. In the 2 days she had been caring for Sophie, something had shifted inside her. She had started to feel attached to this child, protective in a way that went beyond just doing the right thing. "What are we going to do?" she asked Marcus. "I don't know anything about taking care of babies. I don't have diapers, formula, proper clothes, nothing. And you probably don't either." Marcus scratched his beard thoughtfully. "No, I definitely don't have baby supplies. But I have cloth we can use for diapers. I have canned milk we can dilute for formula. I have warm blankets and a safe shelter. It won't be perfect, but we can keep her fed, warm, and safe until we can get down the mountain. People raised babies with a lot less for thousands of years." Elena nodded slowly. Okay, we can do this. We'll figure it out together." Marcus looked at this woman who had stumbled into his isolated life, bringing with her an abandoned baby and a story that had shaken him out of his careful routine. For 5 years he had avoided connections, avoided responsibility for other people, avoided anything that might lead to loss and pain. But now, whether he liked it or not, he was responsible for 2 lives. The first full day together in the cabin was awkward and strange for both Marcus and Elena. They were 2 complete strangers who had been thrown together by circumstances beyond their control, now forced to share a small space and care for a helpless infant. Marcus, who had spent 5 years avoiding human contact, suddenly found his quiet cabin filled with the sounds of a baby crying, a woman moving around, conversations that broke his usual silence. But as the hours passed, they fell into a rhythm. Marcus showed Elena where everything was in the cabin. He gave her clean, dry clothes to wear since her own were still damp and damaged. His shirts were enormous on her small frame, and she had to roll up the sleeves several times, but they were warm and comfortable. He set up a private corner of the cabin where she could change and have some privacy, hanging a blanket as a makeshift curtain. Together, they figured out how to care for Sophie. Marcus used his hunting knife to cut up one of his old flannel shirts into squares that they could use as diapers. Elena showed him how to fold them properly and secure them with strips of cloth. It was primitive compared to modern disposable diapers, but it worked. They washed the used cloth diapers in warm water and hung them near the fire to dry. Feeding Sophie was a constant challenge. The baby needed to eat every few hours, and the process of diluting canned milk, warming it to the right temperature, and feeding it to her using a cloth took time and patience. Marcus watched as Elena held Sophie, talking to her softly while feeding her, and he noticed how natural she seemed with the baby, even though she claimed she had no experience with children. "You're good with her," Marcus commented on the second morning as Elena fed Sophie by the fire. Elena looked up, surprised. "You think so? I feel like I'm making everything up as I go along. I keep worrying I'm doing it all wrong." "You kept her alive through a blizzard," Marcus reminded her. "I'd say your instincts are pretty good." That evening, as they sat by the fire after Sophie had fallen asleep, Elena asked Marcus about himself. She had shared her story, and now she was curious about this mysterious mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness. Marcus was reluctant at first. He wasn't used to talking about himself, wasn't comfortable with personal questions. But there was something about the situation, about the honesty Elena had shown in sharing her own story, that made him want to open up at least a little. "I used to lead a search and rescue team," he began, staring into the flames. "Down in Denver, we would go out in bad weather, dangerous conditions, to find lost hikers, injured climbers, people who got into trouble in the mountains." Elena listened quietly, sensing there was more to the story. "I had a team of 6 people. They were the best. Brave, skilled, dedicated. We saved a lot of lives together." Marcus's voice grew quieter. 5 years ago, we got a call about some college students who had gone skiing in a restricted area. There had been heavy snow for days, and the avalanche danger was extreme. I knew it was risky, but those kids needed help. I made the decision to go out. He paused, his jaw tight with emotion. There was an avalanche. My entire team was buried. I survived only because I happened to be a little behind them checking my equipment. By the time more rescuers arrived, it was too late. All 6 of them were gone. Oh, Marcus, Elena said softly. I'm so sorry. It was my fault, Marcus continued, his voice rough. I was the team leader. I made the call to go out in those conditions. I got them killed. After that, I couldn't do the work anymore. I couldn't be responsible for other people's lives. I couldn't face the possibility of losing anyone else because of my decisions. So I came up here, built this life where I don't have to be responsible for anyone but myself. Elena was quiet for a moment, absorbing his pain. It wasn't your fault, she finally said. You were trying to save people. That's what you did. That's who you were. The avalanche was an act of nature, not something you caused. I should have known better, Marcus said stubbornly. I should have called it off. And those college students might have died, Elena pointed out gently. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. You can't predict everything. Sometimes terrible things happen even when we do everything right. Marcus didn't respond, but her words settled into him, challenging the guilt he had carried for so long. The 3rd day brought a change in their dynamic. Sophie woke up in the middle of the night crying inconsolably. Elena tried everything, feeding her, changing her, rocking her, but nothing worked. The baby's cries filled the small cabin, and Elena was near tears herself from exhaustion and frustration. Marcus, who had been trying to sleep on his couch while Elena used his bed, finally got up. Let me try, he said. Elena handed Sophie over gratefully, too tired to protest. Marcus held the tiny baby awkwardly at first, unsure of himself. But then some instinct took over. He held her against his chest, her little head resting near his heart, and began walking slowly around the cabin, humming a tuneless melody under his breath. Within minutes, Sophie's cries quieted. Within 10 minutes, she was asleep. Marcus stood there in the firelight, this big bearded mountain man, holding a tiny infant, and something shifted in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in 5 years, a sense of purpose, of connection, of being needed. When he looked up, Elena was watching him with tears in her eyes. You're a natural, she whispered. I guess she just needed someone different, Marcus said, but he couldn't quite hide the small smile that tugged at his lips. After that night, they became a true team. Marcus would take the early morning feeding while Elena slept. Elena would handle the afternoon care while Marcus went out to chop wood and check on the cabin's condition. They cooked meals together, washed Sophie's makeshift diapers together, took turns holding her when she was fussy, and they talked. In those long hours, trapped inside by the storm, they shared stories about their lives. Elena told Marcus about her failed marriage 2 years earlier, how her ex-husband had wanted her to give up photography and settle into a conventional life, how she had chosen her passion over the relationship. She talked about her fear of commitment, her tendency to run away when things got too serious or complicated. Marcus shared more about his life before the tragedy, about the satisfaction he had found in rescue work, the adrenaline and purpose it had given him. He talked about his parents, both deceased now, and his lonely childhood as an only child. He admitted that even before the avalanche, he had always been more comfortable with solitude than with people. But you're good with people, Elena argued. Look at how you've been with me, with Sophie. You're kind, patient, helpful. You saved our lives. That's different, Marcus said. That's just practical help. I can do practical. It's the emotional stuff that's hard for me. Getting close to people, letting them matter, risking loss again. Elena understood that fear all too well. I get it, she said. After my divorce, I threw myself into my work. I spend most of my time alone in the wilderness photographing animals, because animals can't hurt you the way people can. They can't disappoint you or leave you or make you feel like you're not enough. They sat in comfortable silence after that, both recognizing themselves in each other's patterns of self-protection. On the 4th day, as Marcus stood by the window watching the storm that was finally beginning to ease, Elena approached him with Sophie in her arms. The baby was awake and calm, looking around with curious dark eyes. Marcus, I need to tell you something, Elena said, her voice uncertain. He turned to face her. What is it? Elena looked down at Sophie, her expression conflicted. Spending these past few days taking care of her with you, I've been thinking a lot about what happens when we get down the mountain, about what happens to Sophie. She'll go into the system, Marcus said. Child Protective Services will take her, try to find her mother, and if they can't, they'll place her with a foster family or put her up for adoption. I know, Elena said quietly. That's the logical thing. That's what's supposed to happen. But Marcus, I can't stop thinking about it. When we turn her over to the authorities, she'll just become another case number. Another baby in an overwhelmed system. We don't know what kind of home she'll end up in, what kind of life she'll have. Marcus could see where this was going, and it made him nervous. Elena! I want to keep her, Elena said in a rush. I know that sounds crazy. I know I'm not prepared. I don't have a stable home life. I'm always traveling for work. But these past few days, holding her, feeding her, watching her sleep, I've fallen in love with her, Marcus. I can't imagine just handing her over to strangers and never knowing what happens to her. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of this conversation. You can't just keep a baby you found. There are laws, procedures, the mother might come forward. There might be family looking for her. I know, Elena said. I'm not talking about just taking her and disappearing. I'm talking about going through the proper channels. Foster care first, and then maybe adoption if the mother's rights are terminated. I want to do this the right way. I just need to try. I need to at least try to become her legal guardian. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes pleading. What do you think? Am I being completely unrealistic? Marcus looked at Sophie, this tiny baby who had literally been abandoned to die in the wilderness. He thought about Elena's devotion to her, the way she had risked her own life to save this child. He thought about the past 4 days, about how they had become a makeshift family in this cabin, about how it had felt to hold Sophie in the middle of the night and feel her tiny heartbeat against his chest. I think, Marcus said slowly, that Sophie is lucky you found her. I think any child would be fortunate to have someone who cares about them the way you care about her. But I also think it's going to be complicated and difficult. The system doesn't always work the way we want it to. Elena nodded, understanding. I know it won't be easy, but I have to try. I can't just walk away from her. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised them both. What if you didn't have to do it alone? Elena looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I mean, what if I helped you? Marcus said, the words coming out before he could stop them. What if we both applied to be her foster parents? 2 people, 2 incomes, more stability than one person alone. It might improve your chances. Elena stared at him in shock. Marcus, you can't be serious. You've been hiding up here for 5 years because you don't want connections or responsibilities. Why would you volunteer for this? Marcus looked at Sophie, then back at Elena. I've been asking myself the same question. 5 years ago, I ran away from responsibility because I was terrified of failing again, of losing people I care about. But these past few days, taking care of Sophie with you, it's made me realize something. Maybe I've been living half a life up here. Maybe I've been so focused on avoiding pain that I've also been avoiding everything that makes life worth living. His voice grew stronger, more certain. That baby was left to die, and you saved her. Then you both nearly died, and I was able to help save you. Maybe that means something. Maybe we're supposed to be part of her story. I don't know. I just know that when I think about you 2 leaving and me going back to my solitary life, it doesn't feel right anymore. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You would really do this? Help me try to become her foster parent, even though we barely know each other? I know enough, Marcus said simply. I know you're brave and selfless and devoted to this child. I know we've worked well together these past few days. I know that Sophie responds to both of us, trusts both of us, and I know that I don't want to go back to being alone. Yeah. Elena looked down at Sophie, then back up at Marcus, hope and fear warring in her expression. This is crazy. We met 4 days ago under the most bizarre circumstances possible. Yes, Marcus agreed. It's completely crazy, but maybe crazy is exactly what this situation needs. The storm finally broke on the 5th day. Marcus woke up early and immediately noticed the difference. The howling wind that had been their constant companion for days had stopped. He went to the window and looked outside. The sky was clear and bright blue, and the sun was shining on what looked like 10 feet of fresh snow surrounding the cabin. The world was beautiful and deadly quiet. Elena was already awake, feeding Sophie by the fire. She looked up when Marcus came into the room. The storm stopped, she said. Yes, Marcus replied. But we still can't leave today. I need to dig out the cabin first, and we need to let the main roads get cleared. Probably tomorrow morning would be the earliest we could safely make the trip down. Elena nodded, but Marcus could see the anxiety in her eyes. Their time in this protective bubble was coming to an end. Soon they would have to face the real world with all its complications and consequences. Marcus spent most of that day outside, digging paths through the snow, checking his truck to make sure it would start, preparing for the journey down the mountain. Elena stayed inside with Sophie, but Marcus could sense her tension every time he came back in. She was quiet, withdrawn, clearly worried about what would happen next. That evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, they sat by the fire and had the conversation they had been avoiding. "We need to have a plan," Marcus said. "When we get to town tomorrow, we'll have to go straight to the police station. We'll need to report everything, the abandoned baby, your accident, all of it. They'll have questions." Elena held her coffee cup tightly. "I know. I've been thinking about it all day. They might separate us from Sophie immediately. They might not let me see her again." "That's possible," Marcus admitted. "But it's also possible they'll see that you saved her life and that you're serious about wanting to care for her. The foster care system is overwhelmed. If you're genuinely interested in becoming a foster parent, they might work with you." "What about you?" Elena asked. "Are you really serious about this? About helping me try to foster her? Because once we tell the authorities that, you can't take it back. They'll investigate your life, your background, your finances. They'll want to know everything about you." Marcus had thought about this extensively during his hours of snow shoveling. "I'm serious," he said. "I've already been through background checks for my search and rescue work. I have savings. I own this cabin outright, and I could get work again if needed. I think I'd pass their requirements. The question is whether they'd approve two unmarried people who barely know each other as foster parents." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "What if we told them we were together? As a couple, I mean. Would that help our chances?" Marcus looked at her carefully. "You mean lie to them?" "Not exactly lie," Elena said, fidgeting with her cup. "I mean, we could be together. We've gotten along well this week. We've already proven we can work as a team caring for Sophie. People have gotten married after knowing each other for less time than we've known each other." "Elena," Marcus said gently, "that's not a good reason to start a relationship, and it's definitely not a good reason to get married." "I know," she said, her voice small. "I'm just scared. I'm scared they'll take her away and I'll never see her again. I'm scared I'll lose her after I've already fallen in love with her." Marcus moved to sit beside her on the couch. "We'll do everything we can. We'll be honest with the authorities. We'll both apply to be foster parents, and we'll make our case. But we have to do this the right way. We can't build Sophie's future on lies or a fake relationship. She deserves better than that." Elena nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "You're right." "I know you're right. I'm just so afraid." "So am I," Marcus admitted. "But we'll face it together." The next morning they packed up carefully. Marcus found an old basket that he padded with blankets to create a safe place for Sophie to ride in the truck. Elena gathered what few belongings she had salvaged from her accident. They bundled Sophie up in layers of warm cloth, and Marcus loaded his truck with supplies for the journey. The drive down the mountain was slow and treacherous. The roads had been plowed, but they were still icy and dangerous. Marcus drove with extreme care, very aware of his precious cargo. Elena sat in the passenger seat with Sophie in her arms, both of them quiet and tense. When they finally reached the small town at the base of the mountain, Marcus drove straight to the police station as they had agreed. It was a small building, just a few rooms, the kind of rural station that probably saw more lost dogs than serious crimes. The officer on duty, a middle-aged woman named Officer Patricia Mills, listened to their story with increasing amazement. She called her supervisor, and soon they were sitting in a small office telling the whole story again to the police chief, a man named Robert Chen. Chief Chen listened carefully, taking notes. He looked at Sophie, sleeping peacefully in Elena's arms, and his expression was troubled. "So you found this baby abandoned in a tent 2 days before the storm, and you've been caring for her ever since?" "Yes," Elena confirmed. "I have the note that was left with her. It's in my camera bag." She carefully retrieved the crumpled piece of paper and handed it over. The chief read it and shook his head. "This is a serious situation. Abandoning a child is a crime. We'll need to launch an investigation to try to find the mother. And we'll need to contact Child Protective Services about the baby." "I understand," Elena said, her voice steady even though Marcus could see her hands shaking. "But I want you to know that I'm interested in becoming her foster parent. I saved her life, I've been caring for her, and I want to continue caring for her." Chief Chen looked surprised. "Ma'am, that's admirable, but becoming a foster parent is a lengthy process. There are background checks, home studies, training requirements. It can take months." "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," Elena said firmly. "And Marcus here is also willing to help. We're both committed to making sure Sophie has a good home." The chief looked between them, clearly trying to figure out their relationship. "Are you two married? Living together?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "We met 6 days ago when Elena and Sophie ended up at my cabin during the storm." "But We've been caring for Sophie together since then, and we both want to be part of her future. Officer Mills, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. Chief, I've seen a lot of abandoned children in my career. Most of the time, nobody cares what happens to them once they're turned over to the system. These two people are actually volunteering to take responsibility. That's rare. Chief Chen nodded slowly. I understand. But this isn't my decision to make. I need to contact CPS and let them handle the placement. In the meantime, you'll both need to give full statements about everything that happened. Over the next several hours, Marcus and Elena were interviewed separately and together. They told their stories multiple times, answered endless questions, and provided every detail they could remember. A social worker from Child Protective Services arrived, a kind woman in her 50s named Dorothy Sanders. Dorothy examined Sophie carefully, checking her health and condition. She looks well cared for, she said with some surprise. Given the circumstances, I expected worse. You two have done a good job keeping her healthy. We did our best, Elena said. We want to continue doing our best for her. I know the process takes time, but I'm willing to start immediately. I'll do whatever training is required, whatever background checks, whatever it takes. Dorothy looked at her thoughtfully. Where are you currently living, Ms. Reyes? Elena hesitated. I've been traveling for work. I don't have a permanent residence right now. But I can find an apartment, establish a stable home. I have savings. I have income from my photography work. And you, Mr. Thornwood? Dorothy asked. I own my cabin outright, Marcus said. I have savings and experience in emergency services. I'm willing to make modifications to my home to make it suitable for a child. Dorothy made notes in her file. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I need to be honest with you both. The fact that you don't have an established relationship, that Miss Reyes doesn't have a permanent residence, and that Mr. Thornwood lives in an isolated cabin far from schools and medical facilities, these are all factors that will work against you in a foster placement evaluation. Elena's face fell, but she didn't give up. What if I move closer to town? What if Marcus and I work together to create a stable home environment? Would that help? It might, Dorothy said carefully, but there's another issue. We need to try to find Sophie's biological mother. If she's found within a certain time frame and wants to reclaim parental rights, that would override any foster placement situation. I understand, Elena said quietly. But even if that happens, at least Sophie will have been cared for properly in the meantime. That's what matters most. Dorothy studied Elena's face for a long moment, then looked at Marcus. You two really care about this baby, don't you? This isn't just about feeling sorry for her or being caught up in dramatic circumstances? No, Marcus said firmly. In the past 6 days, Sophie has become important to both of us. I know that sounds strange given how short a time it's been, but it's true. We're not going to walk away from her. Dorothy closed her file. All right, here's what's going to happen. Sophie will need to go into temporary foster care while we investigate and while you both go through the approval process if you choose to proceed. I have an experienced foster family in town who can take her tonight. No, Elena said immediately, then caught herself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound defiant. It's just, can't she stay with me? Just until you find a placement? I've been caring for her for almost a week now. Taking her away suddenly seems cruel for both of us. Dorothy considered this. It's highly irregular. But given the circumstances and given that you did save her life, I might be able to arrange for a temporary emergency placement with you for a few days while we process everything. You'd need to stay in town where we can monitor the situation, and you'd need someone to stay with you who has been cleared. She looked at Marcus. Mr. Thornwood, I can run a quick preliminary background check on you today. If it comes back clean, you could stay with Miss Reyes and the baby at a local hotel for a few days while we work out the details. Would that be acceptable? Marcus and Elena looked at each other, both feeling a surge of hope. Yes, they said in unison. All right, Dorothy said. Let me make some calls. 2 hours later, after Marcus's background check came back clean and Dorothy had made arrangements, they found themselves checking into a small hotel in town. The room had 2 beds, a small bathroom, and not much else, but it felt like a palace compared to what they'd feared might happen. Elena laid Sophie down on one of the beds, surrounding her with pillows so she couldn't roll off. The baby was awake, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings with curious eyes. I can't believe they're letting us keep her even temporarily, Elena said, sitting on the edge of the bed and watching Sophie. Dorothy seems like a good person, Marcus said. I think she could see how much you care. That counted for something. Over the next few days, they began the long process of becoming approved foster parents. They attended an orientation meeting where they learned about the requirements, the challenges, and the realities of foster care. They started the required training classes. They met with social workers who asked detailed questions about their lives, their motivations, and their ability to care for a child. Elena found a small house to rent on the outskirts of town, a place with 2 bedrooms and a yard. It wasn't much, but it was clean and safe. Marcus helped her move in, and to both their surprise, he found himself spending most of his time there rather than at his cabin. It just seemed natural to be where Sophie was, to be part of the daily routine of caring for her. 6 weeks after they had come down from the mountain, they received news. The police had found Sophie's mother. She was 17 years old, living in her car, terrified and alone. She had gotten pregnant, hidden it from her family, and had been trying to survive on her own after running away from an abusive home. When Sophie was born, she had been overwhelmed and desperate. Leaving the baby near a popular hiking area had been her attempt to make sure someone would find her daughter quickly and give her a better life than she could provide. The young mother was offered support services, counseling, and help. But after meeting with social workers and thinking carefully about her situation, she made the heartbreaking decision to terminate her parental rights. She wanted Sophie to be adopted by people who could give her the stable, loving home that she couldn't provide. Dorothy came to Elena's house to deliver the news in person. "The mother has signed the papers," she said. "Sophie is now legally free for adoption. And I wanted you to know that your foster parent application has been approved. You'll be getting Sophie as your first foster placement, with the possibility of adoption once the required waiting period is complete." Elena burst into tears. "Really? We're approved? Both of us?" "Both of you," Dorothy confirmed, smiling at Marcus. "You two have proven over these past weeks that you're committed and capable. You've completed all the training, passed all the checks, and most importantly, you've continued to provide excellent care for Sophie. The fact that you're willing to work together, even though you're not married, shows a level of dedication that's impressive." Marcus felt something break open in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. He looked at Elena, who was crying and laughing at the same time, and then at Sophie, who was playing with a soft toy on the floor, completely unaware that her entire future had just been decided. "Thank you," Elena managed to say through her tears. "Thank you so much." 8 months later, the adoption was finalized. Marcus and Elena stood in a courtroom with Sophie, now almost a year old, officially becoming her parents. The judge smiled as she signed the papers, making it legal and permanent. But the surprises weren't over. During those 8 months of fostering Sophie together, something had happened between Marcus and Elena. The partnership they had formed in that cabin on the mountain had deepened into something more. They had been taking it slowly, both cautious because of their past hurts and their commitment to putting Sophie first. But love had grown anyway, quietly and steadily, built on a foundation of shared purpose and genuine respect. 3 months after the adoption, on a cool autumn evening, Marcus took Elena back up to his cabin on the mountain. He had been working on it, renovating it slowly, adding proper insulation, a modern heating system, and solar panels for electricity. He had built a beautiful nursery in what used to be his storage room, painting it soft colors and installing a window that looked out over the mountains. "I've been thinking," Marcus said as they stood on the porch watching the sunset, Sophie sleeping peacefully in a carrier on Elena's chest. "This cabin is where our story started. This is where you and Sophie came into my life and changed everything. I was thinking maybe it could be where the next chapter begins too." He pulled a small box from his pocket and got down on one knee. "Elena Reyes, will you marry me? Not because it would help with paperwork or make things easier with Sophie, but because I love you. Because you're brave and kind, and you've taught me that opening your heart again is worth the risk." Elena looked down at him with tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in a small ceremony at the cabin the following spring. Sophie, now a toddler learning to walk, was their flower girl, wobbling down the aisle dropping petals everywhere. A few close friends attended, including Dorothy, who had become like family to them. Marcus continued doing part-time search and rescue work, but now he had a reason to always come home safely. Elena adjusted her photography work, taking assignments closer to home and bringing Sophie along when possible. They split their time between the cabin and the house in town, giving Sophie the best of both worlds, the peace and beauty of the mountains, and the community and resources of town. As the years passed, Sophie grew into a curious, confident child who loved hiking with her dad and photography with her mom. They told her story from the beginning, age-appropriate versions that helped her understand her unique beginning. She knew she had been found and chosen and loved fiercely by two people who had also found each other in the process. On the anniversary of the storm each year, the family would go up to the cabin, and Marcus would tell Sophie the story of the night a brave woman and a tiny baby had appeared in his life and saved him from his loneliness. Elena would add her perspective about how Mountain Man had saved both their lives and then opened his heart to let them stay. Sophie would listen to the story with wide eyes, even as she got older and had heard it many times before. It never got old because it was a reminder of something important, that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things, that families can form in unexpected ways, and that love can bloom even in the coldest storms. Marcus would look at his wife and daughter on those nights, the firelight dancing on their faces, and feel grateful for that broken satellite phone he had never replaced, for an unlocked door, for a stranger's desperate choice to seek warmth in his bed. All the coincidences and choices that had seemed small at the time had added up to this. A family, a purpose, a life worth living. He was no longer the isolated man hiding from responsibility and connection. He was a husband, a father, a person who had learned that the risk of loving others was worth taking. And it had all started on one cold February night when he woke up to find he wasn't alone anymore and discovered that maybe he had never wanted to be alone in the first place. The little girl who had been abandoned in the wilderness had indeed saved 2 people, just not in the way anyone would have expected. And in return, those 2 people had given her something precious. A family built not on biology but on choice, sacrifice, and love that grew stronger with each passing day.